And we have today really interesting program. And we start with short presentations by the two projects and their recent policy recommendations. And after that, we have some commentary speech, and then we have a panel discussion. And at the end, everybody has a chance to ask some questions, and we will record this beginning of the webinar, but not the Q&A session. And this recording will be available later at the BIONEXT webpage. And just some housekeeping issues. So please keep your microphone muted unless you are speaker. And then once we have the Q&A session, please raise your hand and open your video so we can see who is asking the questions. And I will try to keep us on time, but we should have enough time for a nice enough time for having a good discussions at the end. But I think it's better that we start with the interesting presentations on the topic. And our first speaker is Helena Valve from the BIONEXT-project and also from the Finnish Environment Institute. So please, Helena, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Soile. If you stop sharing, I can share my presentation. I don't think I can share now. Is somebody sharing now? Okay.
Yes, it was lagging a bit. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, it's my pleasure to tell you briefly about policy brief BIONEXT project published today. The title is Bottom-up Practices for Transformative Change. Now. Why is now? Yeah, the key message we have is pretty simple. We really think that policymakers across Europe need to take stock of bottom-up action. And well, one key reason, of course, is that we know that there are not kind of easy silver bullets to the biodiversity loss, to the fighting of biodiversity loss. So it's very tricky to fight that in a top-down manner. But what we know too is that across Europe, individuals and groups seek to really face this challenge as a part of their everyday work and voluntary activism. And they challenge business as usual practices while doing so. And importantly, they constantly find new ways to turn biodiversity concerns, which are pretty abstract, into tangible, kind of actionable issues. And our key one of our key arguments is that this work is innovative. New options for change emerge. So the citizen groups, policy entrepreneurs, also company representatives indicate how biodiversity can be made to matter in new ways. But we also think that in order to really take stock of bottom-up action, we need to acknowledge its diversity. We easily have kind of quite stereotypical ideas of what the action is and who are the actors. So what we did in the BIONEXT project, we carried out interviews, arranged focus groups, performed desk searches, and based on that data, we were able to identify what we call modes of intervention. And these distinct modes are quite different from each other. And altogether, we were able to identify with our data 7 modes of intervention the bottom-up actors mobilize when seeking to fight biodiversity loss. I won't go through them all here. You can learn more from our research paper, and also in our policy brief, we provide some examples. But the first lesson, of course, is the diversity, really, and that if we want to engage with the actors, learn from them critically, have critical dialogues, it's important to see how diverse these kind of intervention logics and modes are. Regarding the first mode of intervention, we provide an example from Finland, where in a Finnish municipality, the local residents really managed to push for a change in the management regime that guided forest management in the municipality forests. So that's the first mode of intervention. We also provide example of the second mode of intervention by drawing from an example from Greece, where in a very tourist-intensive region, researchers were able to kind of bring actors together and find ways to really reappropriate land and water to safeguard biodiversity in the region. And then finally, I would like to focus on the sixth mode of intervention here, that also an example from Greece, where in a region which was hit very hard by economic recession, the local politicians have been working to turn biodiversity into an asset for regional development. While we engaged with the different actors across Europe, we also recognized that they have some common concerns. And that provided us a basis to define recommendations for policymakers. And those recommendations are kind of the hardcore of our policy brief. In part, the recommendations are very generic and maybe even obvious. For example, our first recommendation says that there's still a need to develop new approaches that prioritize biodiversity protection over short-term interests. This is, of course, a problem that we are probably all aware of, and there's nothing new with that, but really what the kind of bottom-up actors are saying, that this is a kind of there's still this condition of kind of a policy failure, regulatory failure across Europe, and this need constant attention. A similar kind of a probably common problem that needs to stay on the policy agenda is the question of these arrangements, institutional material arrangements that hinder any attempts to transformative change. And in part, these barriers are pretty obvious. We know, for example, that some stakeholders have very strong lobbying powers, but also the bottom-up actors are able to point to kind of a more unusual suspects, like financial dependencies that hinder change. Really, in the banking sector, for example, some specific arrangements. Then thirdly, we wish to remind that while we might need new policies and regulations, really the underperformance of the existing biodiversity governance institutions is a major problem, and really hampers effective policy implementation. And the claim from our interviewees and for example, was that really the voluntary initiatives might take a really heavy burden because public institutions are failing to meet their commitments. And then our two last recommendations. The fourth one is the most specific one. We recognize that for the bottom-up actors in their all diversity, a common problem is that they tackle to kind of make sense of public regulations and to live with the bureaucracy involved, and they also seek to learn from others. So we are kind of proposing that there might be, or proposing that there's a need for kind of more public, what we call public intermediation, in the sense that we support these bottom-up actors, allowing their networking and capacity building. This can be particularly important in the fields of regional development and cohesion policy, for example. And then finally, just to repeat myself, really it's important that we stay attentive to the diversity and the diverse ways in which transformative change is driven from below. And of course, we can't expect that actors just wait for predefined proposals and processes to which to engage, but they really want to shape the policy agendas. Thank you.
Thank you, Helena. And as said earlier, we keep the questions from audience at the end of this webinar, but now it's time for our commentary speech. So Pierre, please introduce yourself and your comments then, please.
Thanks a lot. Thanks to Helena for an excellent presentation, and thanks to the organizers for inviting me to comment this policy brief. I am Pierre Cornu, member of the INRAE, French National Research Institute for Agriculture, Food and the Environment, and I am the head of a research unit working on territorial transitions in central France. As my commentary will mainly lead to a strong agreement to the whole of this policy brief, I think it would be more interesting for me to focus on the processes and the role of research in this question of helping policymakers to learn how to welcome bottom-up biodiversity action. So first, what are the highlights of this policy brief that I want to highlight myself? The policy brief proposes to unfold the concept of biodiversity, which is, of course, natural, but also linked to social life. And it means that we must address system thinking and complexity theories. The second lesson from this policy brief is that, of course, knowledge-based and bottom-up action is principled, but not only principled, it is also mostly relevant at the highest level. Third, bottom-up dynamics and institutional procedures must be changed. We must learn how to reverse who is to adapt to what. And I think this is the strongest proposal in the policy brief. So we must all learn how to shift to non-linearity and to iterative processes. We must pay more attention to socio-technical emergencies and enhance positive conceptions of arrangements, which is a French word, arrangement in French. So, of course, it is important to list the modes of intervention as it is proposed in the policy brief. But moreover, I think it is a brand new grammar of public action that we must help to found. What is at stake in this policy brief? I think two aspects mainly. First, we must bridge the gap between what policymakers need to learn, that's what is written in the paper, and I would slightly correct what policymakers should be eager to learn and implement, meaning, in other words, that we must create appeal, involvement, momentum about biodiversity as a lever for enhancing socio-ecosystemic sustainability at all scales. My point of view is a situated one. As a member of INRAE, which is itself a member of the Pierre network, we work as an international protagonist of science policy interface. We practice targeted research, and sustainability agenda is very important to us. Our science is basically interdisciplinary. We practice open science and embeddedness in transformative action. And I think it is very important when we read this policy brief to know how we can share this practice of transformative action and transformative research. We have a strong know-how on step-by-step transitions and how to implement change. Of course, we mainly work on agri-food systems and biodiversity issues, but I think most of all, it is a systemic approach that is needed. And of course, very important to all the persons present here, we think that Europe is the most relevant level of thinking and designing to implement change. So, my commentary would be that mostly what we need to address is how to unlock the dialogue between bottom-up action and policymaking, which is at the core of the paper. This policy brief is, in my eyes, no mere routine of the science policy dialogue, but on the contrary, it is a powerful call for change addressed to research institutions, not only, but mostly to research institutions. Aware of the repeated failures of consensus building procedures, we are invited to accept controversies and conflicts as necessary steps of a non-linear, again, way to build material and immaterial commons, and to bring them to the fore. For that purpose, we must learn how to design and to build appropriate scenes or relevant arrangements, I take the word again, inclusive and open to social and cultural diversity for enhancing respectful and fruitful dialogues about biodiversity management in every specific context on our continent. In my eyes, such a shift implies to rethink science-based action in a transdisciplinary and processual perspective, seeking no easy and permanent solution, but robustness and adaptation to fluctuations, discussed and designed with and for. I think it's important to say the two words, we work with and we work for inhabitants, citizens, stakeholders, and to do it boldly and aptly advocated for at governance level. To conclude, my proposal, the proposal of my institution, would be that this new perspective should be strongly backed by a new clinical conception of the fragile interconnection between ecological, societal, and political temporalities. Indeed, caring about biodiversity means taking care of time itself, the time of nature, the time of societies. For time is no longer given to us and must be healed to endure. Justice and health are thus no separate issues from biodiversity. They all need to be associated in a new bottom-up and knowledge-based narrative. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Pierre. That was a thorough commentary, and we keep the questions at the end. Although I'm tempted to give a floor to Helena, but perhaps we can have a chat at the end and just follow the program. Yeah. So our next speaker comes from the BIOTraCes project. So Luciane, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. So first and foremost, I would like to Thank you all for having me in this webinar discussing biodiversity issues together with BIONEXT project. Saying some words about BIOTraCes. BIOTraCes is Horizon Europe project implemented in 9 European countries: Spain, Portugal, Sweden, Hungary, Netherlands, Lithuania, Romania, and Italy. And it's focused on 4 high-impact sectors: agriculture, forestry, urbanization, and aquatic resources management. The project's main goal is to identify social, cultural, political, and economic lock-ins that block biodiversity regeneration and to co-create strategies that help overcome them. BIOTraCes approach is guided by 4 principles: pluralizing, that's to say acknowledging a diversity of values and voices; empowering; politicizing, that's to say identifying political biases that slow down or obstruct transformative change; and embedding, that's to say integrating regeneration into the economy, social practice, public policy. The reflection I bring today draws on one of our policy briefs, which connects 3 dimensions: just and effective biodiversity governance, gender equity, and intersectionality. So let's move on. Please, Juka, if you can go to the second slide. It's about the main findings. I will, the third slide, sorry. Again. And once again. Thank you. So I will be brief about the main findings, some preliminary findings, because we do not have much time. But I would like to stress here 4 or 5 aspects. The first one is persistent underrepresentation of marginalized groups. It remains a problem. Women, particularly minority women, migrant families, Roma, racialized communities are often absent or underrepresented in participatory spaces related to biodiverse governance. Secondly, there is still a disconnection between biodiversity goals and social justice concerns. I will come back to this later on. Thirdly, gender inequalities often remains invisible. Women's exclusion from governance is frequently not recognized as a problem. Women represent 40% of forest owners, but are rarely decision makers when male partners are involved. Elderly women are community anchors, but they are at the same time among the most exposed to biodiversity loss and climate risks. Single mothers and low-income women face structural exclusion from housing and land access, deepening their vulnerability. The mismatch between women's economic relevance and their institutional recognition is striking and consistently overlooked. Although women are 31.6% of farm operators, they represent less than 10% of farm managers in some European countries. The forest sector shows a similar imbalance. Women account for just 20% of the workforce in Europe, but are concentrated in seasonal and informal roles with less income security and representation. In water governance, women are primary users of water for food production, household needs, care work, yet they remain underrepresented in ministries, councils, and community bodies responsible for water and land management. So let us go to the key messages. Thank you, Tuka. The first one is biodiversity loss is not neutral. It has a gender impact. Women, especially in rural and low-income settings, are among the first to feel its effects because they rely directly on local ecosystems for food, water, and fuel. Yet they often have no secure land rights, less access to credit, and limited influence over decisions that shape their environment. Secondly, inequalities are layered. Gender interacts with race, ethnicity, class, age, and migration status, to name but a few, to multiply disadvantages. And these overlapping barriers translate into greater exposure to the impacts of biodiversity loss. Migrant women, for example, may depend on precarious jobs tied to land and water use, but lack secure rights, while elderly women, I mentioned before, in remote areas, often rely on fragile local ecosystems for food and care work. Thirdly, the third key message, vulnerable groups on one side, and I mean youth, children, elderly, people with disabilities on one side, and marginalized groups on the other, migrants, homo people, racialized communities, transgender people remain underrepresented in decision-making spaces. Ensuring their meaningful participation is not just a matter of fairness, it's a precondition for effective biodiversity governance, especially because these groups are disproportionately affected by the risks linked to biodiversity loss, and we have many European reports addressing that. Fourth, gender equity cannot remain an external agenda. It must be embedded in both governance structures, biodiversity governance structures, and community practices. And to end up, social and environmental issues are inseparable. We cannot regenerate ecosystems while leaving existing social injustice intact. So I go to the policy recommendations to end up. First, at the level of research and innovation, please, Juka, to the next, to go faster. At the level of research and innovation, we must move beyond tokenism. It's not enough for projects to tick the box that says gender considered. We need to mainstream gender in biodiversity research, making it a structural part of how projects are designed, implemented, and evaluated. ERA, European Research Action, monitoring schemes should be expanded so that gender considerations are systematically integrated across all projects dealing with regenerative governance. Secondly, we must also provide capacity building on intersectional approaches for researchers and technical staff working on nature-based solutions. And we needed to capture, and why is that? Because we needed to capture the lived experiences of I lost here. Sorry. The lived experiences, especially for women and other vulnerable groups, so that the strategies are truly evidence-based and gender-responsive. And this is not just about researchers. We must also raise the civil society awareness and foster local engagement. People need to understand why inclusive gender equity matters for innovation and for biodiversity governance, and we needed to work on overcoming local resistance to change it. If we want that gender equity goals set by the European Commission can be more than nice words on paper. At the same time, we must, and it's very important, engage key stakeholders in the high-impact sector, agriculture, forestry, aquatic resources, and urbanization, to name but a few. These are the places where many of the decisions about biodiversity or affecting biodiversity are made, and they must be mobilized to adopt biodiversity guidelines and embed inclusive gender equity into their sectoral policies and everyday practice. Going to the national and European level, we must incorporate biodiversity regeneration and conservation criteria into all funding schemes for the high-impact sector. Agriculture, forestry, aquatic resources, urbanization, as I said before. Funding should reward those who concretely adopt regenerative practice, soil improvement, livestock density impact reduction, responsible wildlife management, use of nature-based solutions, and who can demonstrate their contribution to biodiversity regeneration. We also needed to finance transition insurance schemes. It's very important, and we have saw that in the field. Farmers and local actors must be able to afford and try experimental techniques in areas that are threatened by climate change and biodiversity loss. This kind of financial security is crucial if we want to encourage risk-taking and innovation. Moreover, we should develop specific calls and credit facilities to cover these initial costs of transformative strategies at local, regional, and national level. Considering the inclusive gender equity we have been talking about, we must create calls to support young people to remain in their territories and funding schemes that explicitly recognize and reward rural women's participation in biodiversity governance, particularly in mitigation and adaptation strategies. And finally, at the local and regional level, we must bring new tools and frameworks to the table. For example, gender and representativeness indicators should be integrated into the public agenda so we can track progress transparently. Local projects on nature-based solutions and biodiversity regeneration must actively foster the participation of underrepresented groups and include gender-sensitive monitoring frameworks to make sure inclusion is real, not rhetorical. These innovation projects at territorial level should be stimulated through small funding schemes to pursue inclusive gender equity in regenerative strategies. And there's a connection between what I said regarding European and national level and what I'm saying about local governance, biodiversity governance. To end up, we also need local authorities and public bodies to provide tailored intersectional responses that address how different women, rural, migrant, indigenous, elderly, transgender are impacted by biodiversity laws and climate change in their territories. And we should stimulate living labs committed to inclusivity and inclusiveness, ensuring that biodiversity regeneration is never decoupled from its social dimension. These are the three set of recommendations BIOTraCes would like to share with you regarding research and innovation framework and policymaking regarding that, regarding governance at national and European level, biodiversity governance, because, as I said, this cannot be decoupled from gender equity issues because of European research area framework, and the decisions that should be taken at local level, at the level of local governance. That's why it's so important to engage local authorities and their staff in that. So thank you very much. These are the recommendations I would like to share with you very briefly.
Thank you so much.
So, Juka, thank you. It's okay.
Okay, excellent. And now it's time for our panel discussion. So I invite our panelists. Could you please open your video so we can all see you, and so Lisa and Kaisa is with us. So I wonder if we have Krista also with us. There are so many participants that it's hard to see whose video is on. Okay, yes, welcome. So perhaps we start so that our panelists, you could present yourself. So perhaps we start with Krista Mikkonen. Please, if you could introduce yourself.
Okay, hello to everyone. I'm Krista Mikkonen. I'm the member of the Finnish Parliament, and I'm also the member of the City Council in Joensuu, which is in the eastern part of the Finland. I have also served as the Minister of Environment and Climate Change from 19 to 21, and these questions related to biodiversity has always been like my core thing in the policy, and thing I'm really want to make the difference.
Thank you, Krista, and welcome to the panel. And our next panelist is Liisa. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Liisa Toopakka, and I'm working with biodiversity issues in the Finnish Association for Nature Conservation. We are one of the oldest and biggest environmental NGOs in Finland, working throughout the country in local, regional, and national level.
Welcome. And then we have Kaisa.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Kaisa Korhonen-Kurki, and I'm a principal researcher and a group manager from Finnish Environment Institute. But I just happen to be from Finland here. I'm a European representative in that sense that I'm a coordinator of BioAgora EU project, which aims to develop a science service for biodiversity with the mandate to support the implementation of biodiversity strategy in Europe, and we do this work in very closely with the European Commission. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. And we originally planned to have a fourth member in our panel, but unfortunately she didn't make it today, so this is us. But I think it's enough if we have like a 3 in the panel, because we have also like quite a long list of recommendations. So and now the idea is that you could, each of the panelists, you could choose kind of a one recommendation, and explain like why you would pick that one recommendation of these 2 policy briefs that we got, and why you chose that, and perhaps perhaps Krista, you could start. If we keep the same order, then I don't have to always give the floor. So perhaps it is like Krista, Liisa, and Kaisa, please.
Okay, thank you. Well, the one what I chose was this from this bottom-up biodiversity or bottom-up thing paper, and I think that actually the first one that need to develop new approaches to prioritize biodiversity protection over short-term interest. I think that's the most important one, because now when I think about the policy making on the national level, and also or maybe especially on the local level, is so often that the decision makers are not seeing the importance of the biodiversity, and all the other aspects are going over the aspect of biodiversity. So I think that's very important that we develop new approaches, that how we can make policymakers to understand that it's not there's so many benefits what we get when we make sure that there's a nature around in the city or near the residential areas. It's not only the question of the biodiversity, it's also the question of health, question of the social recreation, and more nowadays a question of the adaptation when we think about the climate crisis and what kind of different kind of consequences we already have. So I think that's we really need some kind of new approaches to make sure that people understand the whole value of the nature. And then, of course, after that, can make the decisions that they take care of the nature and the biodiversity.
Okay, thank you. And then Lisa, please.
Okay, thanks. I also chose one from the bottom-up biodiversity action policy brief. I think it was number 2 in Helena's presentation, the recommendation about European regulators and policymakers should alter institutional and political arrangements hindering transformative change. I think this is a really important one because we are really needing and looking for cross-cutting change in order to create a more sustainable society. And I think this requires changes in the business as usual and calls for more holistic approach maybe. And I feel this recommendation or dismantling the existing dynamics would really help us to move in the right direction. Because right now, quite often the situation, unfortunately, is that the ones having the most money and thanks to this, like maybe most visibility or like possibilities to take part, are speaking the loudest, and they are the ones getting heard. And this is often quite encouraging for the grassroots level actors to take part in the discussions, because it really getting your voice heard from the grassroots really requires a lot of time and effort from people, and often even getting into these discussions is motivated by some threat to the local environment maybe. So the processes can be really draining, and if quite often if the people are not heard, they are left really disappointed and disencouraged. And I think quite often the existing dynamics really prevent a lot of participation from the local or regular people, and block the chances of them getting heard. So that's why I chose this one. Thanks.
Okay, if
Thank you,
I
Lisa.
continue, okay, sorry. If I continue, this is not planned at all with the previous speakers, but I actually chose the third one, which goes nicely in a row. But I actually break a rule in that sense that I actually chose the third and fourth one. The third in that sense because I think it's really. Although I think we all agree that it's utmost important that we develop a new governance approaches and models as it was in the first recommendation. But I think would be also useful to go through what we already have and look at the underperformance of those, because we might already have very useful tools and instruments, but they are just like, as said here, they are like a poorly financed, and there's like insufficient expertise to really, they're not recognized as such and given the power they could have. So I think this could be a bit of like a low-hanging fruit in that sense, that quite easily, without inventing any like a fancy new things, you could really be quite effective already. And then if I take my hat presenting the science policy interface here, which is about the intermediation. So that's why the fourth recommendation really speaks to me in a way, because in the science policy interface is about the intermediation between science and policy. And it really lacks on human resources and lacks a formalization and the recognition and institutionalization, in particular also on the European level. Even there are like a series of activities and projects, and in particular projects, which goes to this third recommendation as well, that it's really like a fixed term things, not something permanent and kind of that would be there for good until it's like evaluated, not working. But in a way that there's like no one really wants to claim and fund this kind of intermediation or, for example, science or knowledge broker work. So I think in that sense, that's like something that also in a governance context, very, very nicely put in this fourth recommendation. But if I still can continue, and since we all picked the ones from this policy brief, I have to say that I also enjoyed reading the other policy brief, in that sense that I think intersectionality in general is really important to take into account in the biodiversity issues, which is quite often neglected, even with talk about the justice issues quite a lot. In the other project where I'm involved, we went through the European biodiversity strategy, for example, and it doesn't mention explicitly equity or justice at all. So I think that's also something that makes you think that how important it is then if it's not even mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, yes, please.
May I also add, because about the other paper about the gender and equality, I think first, I think it was very interesting as well, and thank you for that. And of course, living in Finland, your first thought might be that, okay, in Finland we have this gender issue is very well done and we don't have any problems with that. But of course, that's not true. And when you continue to thinking, you notice that when we are talking, for example, the biodiversity, and especially that the way how we use the nature resources, which is linked with the biodiversity, there's different gender aspects you need to take account. For example, the owners of the forest, are they men or women, and do they have the different kind of aspects? We know that quite often the women are more interested and more willing to change their thoughts and take care of the nature and take care of the biodiversity. And also the ways that how the men and women use the nature in their leisure time. Like if you think about the fishing and hunting, that's mostly the men who are doing it. Of course, I mean, it's not so simple. There's also women involved, but like in the big picture. And also when you are talking about the picking up the berries or mushrooms, that's the way the women use the forest more often. So even in countries like Finland, you don't you shouldn't forget this gender aspect when we are talking about the nature, the use of the nature, the use of the nature resources, and also how you involve everybody, and so that's the only way that you can get the views from everyone. And even though I think at this at today there is more and more women forest owners, but if you look at those different kind of NGOs who are what forest owners organization, they are mainly men who are making decisions there. So it's so you should understand and take notice for that also, that maybe the voice what you hear from the organization, it's not so widely shared. That was the reality.
Thank you, Krista. Lisa, do you want to comment on the previous speakers or the last policy brief?
I agree with Krista on the issues in Finland, and I was like about the last policy brief, I like picked my favorite, or like the recommendations I liked the most were supporting local economy models, mitigating local transition costs, and encourage innovative, inclusive, community-based business models. And I think this was not maybe, or like, I don't know if Finland was sort of the main focus or main country that this policy brief was focused on, but I think these could be like a really helpful tools here also. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, and then we continue with the, how do I say, a tough part. So okay, given the recommendation you picked up, so who should put that in practice? Who should enforce it? So
Well, I
perhaps
think
Krista,
we
you can
need.
start.
I think we need everyone and all the different kind of stakeholders. And of course, if you are thinking about the local governance, it's the municipalities who should be more active and understand and think the new ways to approach the thing. And but of course, the decision makers themselves, they can be active as well and demand that we need new ways to discuss and get the information from different aspects, not only the economical aspects, but also the other aspects. And of course, the citizens as well, we know that if they are very active and loud, they may succeed with the change, but still, I think maybe the main responsibility is for the municipality itself, and they need to develop these new approaches. And actually, like Kaisa said, we might have all good examples in some places, but it's also the question that how we can share them, how we manage to spread these new good tools around the country, around the Europe.
Should I go next? Yeah. It kind of says in the recommendation that the European regulators and policymakers should make the change. And yeah, I think it's a lot on their responsibility, kind of who do they listen to and what ways of participation are there and whose opinions are really heard. There's like one thing is to arrange a hearing or possibility for different groups to have their say, and then another thing is that who actually gets heard and via what routes. I think ways to address this issue could be firstly just to make it more visible, make these connections more visible, and make it clear who benefits from the decisions that harm the environment and the practices that harm the environment, and yeah, whose voices get heard. So one thing could be like increase the visibility, and other solution could also be to kind of adopt more science-based decision making in this. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Okay. I at the moment work mostly with the European level and with the Commission, where which I think it's not only the Commission, but I think it's a common characteristic for all us humans and all the governments governance arrangements is this like a resistance of change. So so like we all need to take responsibility, of course, of that, but I would also see, when I kind of really much want to emphasize this, like a formalizing the role of intermediation and the organizations and the actors that really do that, being that then in the science policy interface, knowledge broker role, or something else that it's described here in the policy brief. So I think it would be then the governments and the Commission as such to give space and role for those intermediation roles, intermediation actors, in a way that because at the moment it's a bit like no one is really recognizing them, but they in the end have a really important role, and they are not financed and so on. So even giving the role would be like a formal role in the governance processes would be a great achievement.
Thank you. And do you want to ask like a question from our presenters or a question from each other as a panelist, like any discussion points from your side?
Well, maybe I could ask from Helena.
Yes, please.
What are those new governance models that you are, new approaches? Public governance bodies need to develop new approaches.
Thanks, Kaisa. If I only knew, but I think that I do think that there needs to be kind of a constant focus on thinking in terms, for example, if we think about continuous forestry in Finland, and there needs to be kind of more data, more examples, and in terms of that example, we also need to really look at the kind of publicly owned land and public companies, what they can do. Like we have a National Forest Services, how they could foster that goal, and kind of not only perhaps establish regulatory routes, but really to also to look innovatively through the means we already have, or kind of actors and what they could do differently. So and of course we do need also new regulations, policies, but that wasn't really our focus of our research this time, and neither did the bottom-up actors specify very closely what they meant by these approaches. But maybe the best answer is if you look at our paper and see what actors are doing to trying to destabilize management regimes, that provides the best answer. So sorry, no clear answers for me.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions, reflections from our panelist side? Okay, not then I will continue asking a question from, or giving floor to Helena. So you didn't have a chance to comment or comment the commentary you got from Pierre. Perhaps you want to reflect back on that.
Thanks, Soile. I was very taken by the commentary, and I'm really digesting, and I'm really kind of appreciating the idea that we are, or the acknowledgement that what we are seeking to provide a new grammar for thinking about public action. That was something that I was very happy to hear that, because that has exactly been our aim. But it doesn't kind of very easily translate into kind of a policy brief format, to be honest. So I was very happy Pierre could kind of see through the text that was our aim. That's the most kind of vivid, what I remember most from the commentary, and of course. Yes, I also like what you said about nonlinearity and complexity, because I totally agree that is kind of something which is kind of affecting the heuristics behind my thinking, to be honest.
Okay, thank you. And now I think it's time to put the recording off, and we can start asking